Jeez, how do you unpack the whole Lance Stroll thing? Lance Stroll has had a very difficult and somewhat vacant 2023 season so far, and he has been nowhere near matching the pace and overall results of his teammate Fernando Alonso. This goes for qualifying, during the race, and his ability to just get the most out of an Aston Martin car that was quite capable earlier in the season. If any other driver was starting their 7th season in F1 with the second fastest car, you would naturally expect them to rack up podiums and just get some decent results. Now, he did start the season recovering from 2 broken wrists and a broken toe. Fair play, I'll give him that. And despite the messy situations during the race, he did manage to rack up some good results. In the first 4 races, he managed to rack up a 6th, a 4th, a DNF, and then a 7th place as well. Not good, not terrible. Meanwhile, Alonso managed to secure 3 third places, a 4th, and then went on a run of finishing every single race in the points until the Singapore Grand Prix. Not a bad run, really. Fernando Alonso is carrying this team on his back, and he is spearheading their fight in the Constructors' Championship, which they are rapidly losing ground on, purely based on Lance Stroll's performances. So then, what's Aston Martin's plan for Lance Stroll, and what are they going to do with him? As we all know, Lance's position at Aston Martin is a very unique one because his father, Lawrence, is the owner of the team. And we've seen various pay drivers in F1, and I don't really like the concept, but it is necessary for some teams to get through the season and survive, so fair play. However, with Lance recently, it's much worse than being a pay driver. Lance's situation right now is he is in that seat simply because his dad is the boss. I mean, there might have been some father-son shenanigans early on in the days of F1 racing, but I'm talking about the modern era that we live in right now. Now, we all want drivers to be in the sport on merit because they have risen up the ranks organically and by being good at what they do, by being good race drivers. What the fans hate is how Lance has an immunity to any bad performances and faces 0 repercussions from any bad performances that he puts in from the team. If any other driver performed the way Lance has recently, they would be chucked out the door, no questions asked. Just look up Nick de Vries. I mean, I'm not an expert, I'm just a guy, but this absolutely stinks, and this is why Lance Stroll gets absolutely no support from the majority of F1 fans. In terms of fan reception though, Lance Stroll is the Harry Maguire of Formula 1. He's kept at the team mysteriously despite some awful performances, and his very presence on the grid is a representation of the injustices in F1. I mean, despite the Herculean efforts from the Aston Martin PR team, they are not going to be able to spin this around and turn him into a likeable driver. He's become a point of ridicule on social media, with even companies like Ryanair taking shots at him now. But from a fan perspective as well, it doesn't look like he's happy to be there either, which would indicate something a little bit deeper, which I'll get into shortly. Now, I do believe Lance is not an awful driver. We've seen what he can do when everything goes right for him. But in order for him to do well, too many things have to be perfect. Unlike Alonso, who can wrestle a rubbish car into a decent position. He did okay earlier in his career, managing to get a pole position and a few podiums, but recently, and especially alongside Alonso, he's starting to look very out of his depth. This is just too much of a risk for Aston Martin, and considering that they've got sponsors and investors to maintain, they are making life very hard for themselves. And despite everything that was going on, Lance has had his contract extended to 2024, and it was stated that there wasn't a big gap between him and Alonso in terms of performance. I mean, what are you talking about? I know Toto Wolff says no one looks at Wikipedia, but it is there in black and white. Let's just switch things over to Daddy Stroll and Aston Martin, the team, for a moment. This creates a very challenging position with sponsors and investors because Lawrence has to guarantee them a certain level in performance and a value for their name appearing on the side of the car, meanwhile selling the value of having his son Lance in the seat. And this has got to create frustration from some of the backers, because you'd have guys from Cognizant or Aramco saying, hang on a minute, you promised us 3rd place in the Constructors' Championship and now we're slipping. What's going on? And this puts Lawrence in a very tricky position, because if he gives in and replaces Lance, the backers will say, oh, so everything you told us before was wrong, thus losing the confidence of the sponsors, because he's now been selling the hell out of Lance, and then he has to do a complete 180 and go back the other way. But for the time being anyway, he has decided to keep pushing that Lance boulder up an ever steepening hill. But if Lance's current trend of results continues, that steepening hill is going to become vertical, and which a Lance-shaped boulder could quite easily come back truck down and crush him. But also the poor guys and girls who are on Lance's side of the garage. I do wonder what the vibe is like between Alonso's and Lance's. I know it's a team sport and everything, but if you're one of Lance's crew, it's got to rub seeing Alonso's crew come back with a trophy and a car in one piece. And also, they're working with a legend. Alonso's crew high-fiving each other, patting each other on the back, going, yeah, well done. Meanwhile, Lance's crew are like, I'll rebuild the car again, he's broken it. Oh, front wing, okay, fine. Oh, he's wrecked the tyres, okay, yep, we'll sort that out. I wonder if we'll ever get anyone better at... No, we can't, because he's the boss's son. And if you're a guy or girl in that team, you're going to have commissions and bonuses based on the team's performance that year. With Alonso carrying everything and Lance turning in these terrible performances and regular mistakes, he is even hurting individuals financially at the team. The bottom line is Lance Stroll would absolutely not be an F1 if he had to stand on his own 2 feet. Normally drivers like this are around for 1 or 2 years and then they're gone. But would he want to stand on his own 2 feet? I think not. I think he's done with the F1 ride and now that he wants to get off. But the issue here is he can't. If he quit now, it would be a move that would massively dishonor and discredit Lawrence. Remember those kids growing up who played a sport simply because they wanted to get their dad's approval or because their dads forced them? They simply didn't play the sport for enjoying it, they were just there for their dad. Well, I think Lance is one of those. But due to his dad's money, he was thrust up the formulas probably a bit too quickly. He was put into Formula 1 and then he was at the point of no return. So I think he's now in a position where he can't leave, and psychologically this has got to be very damaging for him. One of the biggest factors about doing anything enjoyable is that there is the option to leave. You may not take it, but the option is there. And this doesn't matter whether it's a job or going to the pub or being an F1 driver, you can always leave if you want. The relationship with his dad Lawrence seems to be very complicated and probably a bit unhealthy too. I mean, can you imagine the conversations or shouting matches they're having behind closed doors? It's got to be so dark. I mean, Lawrence knows that he has to stay because he has to repay the faith and the money that his dad has put towards his career. If Lance quits, Lawrence has certainly more to lose in terms of his reputation and his word, but this would probably be a short-term loss for a long-term gain. Now this is where it gets interesting. On the 24th of May, prior to the Monaco Grand Prix, Aston Martin announced that they would be using Honda engines from the 2026 season onwards. Now, I have a theory on this. If you look at Lance's performance prior to the Monaco Grand Prix, they were okay. Not great, not terrible, they were okay. Monaco was an absolute cluster for Lance, top to bottom, and his races afterwards have been falling way behind of what's expected from the AMR23 car. What's a big factor that splits these performances? The Honda engine deal. I don't think it is a coincidence, and there is something huge behind it. With Honda coming on board, part of this deal is that they will have to have a Honda-backed driver in one of the seats. That's probably Yuki Tsunoda or someone else. Combining this with a seasoned driver to spearhead their fight, that's definitely not going to be Lance Stroll. Therefore, this leaves no space for him in the team. Lance knows that he has no place at Aston Martin past 2025. However, due to the commitment that Lawrence has made to him and how he has had to explain this to the backers and investors and sponsors, he will be forced to remain at the team until 2025, as Lawrence strikes me as a person who never likes to admit that he's wrong. Lance is fully aware of this impending doom, and it will be a slow and painful ride until the end of the 2025 season, compared to if he was just dropped immediately. And this is why his performances and his confidence have just fallen off a cliff. But just as Lawrence has had to justify his commitment to Lance, dropping him immediately will suddenly leave investors doubting everything that he said so far. And the deal, I think, is done and dusted, and we will just have to ride this out. And I think this is how everyone is going to get out of this. With Honda coming on board for 2026, everyone's going to win. Lance Stroll and Aston Martin will have to part ways due to Honda's terms of having one of their back drivers in one of the seats. It will be sold and explained as a tough decision that we all had to do, and it's a decision that no father will ever want to make. Poor Daddy Stroll. Lance will retire or drop into a reserve role, admitting that it is the best thing to do for his dad and the best way that he can repay him. Therefore, Aston Martin has a much more credible driver lineup, despite Honda's terms, and will be a much more of a significant force moving forward. Therefore, everyone's a winner. With Aston Martin's new factory being fully online by then, and then combining with Honda power, I think they can be a serious force to be reckoned with, especially when they sort out their driver lineup. You know, if they sign someone like Leclerc or Russell, Albon, Norris, to go alongside the Honda driver, they'll be back in business. So there we go. That's what I think Aston Martin have planned for Lance Stroll, and that's how this whole saga will come to a close. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. It'll be very cool to see what you guys think on this one. I'll see you again soon. I'm Paul. Thanks so much for watching.